Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. From websites and online stores, Squarespace is the all-in-one place to build a beautiful online presence. Hello friends, I hope that you've been well. In today's video, I'm going to be taking you through this very mixed media illustration, and it is the start of my Zodiac portrait series. And we are starting off with Capricorn, and I will be doing a Zodiac portrait for every month for my Patreon page. So to start, I am using a hot press paper and wetting the page here just with clean water, and then going in with really light washes of watercolor. I have been really wanting to experiment more with using color pencils in my painting process. And so that's why I'm using a hot press paper, even though I've always said that I'm more of a cold press paper person, but I'm just trying to experiment more with my mediums and mixing them with each other. And so I find that with hot press paper, it's more suitable with watercolors and color pencils on top because there's less texture than there would be with cold press paper. And so, yeah, I've been posting about the process of this throughout on Instagram, and needless to say, it was quite the journey because I didn't really have a clear vision of how I wanted to use these mediums. I have been kind of feeling a bit lost in terms of exactly what I want my work to look like and how to achieve it. So this was definitely quite the experimenting experience with this illustration, but it mostly came together in the end. And so, yeah, you can see I'm just going in with different layers of watercolor to build up the color and add in some of the values. With this color palette, I wanted to keep it very purple because with Capricorn, the notes that I have is that the main colors for Capricorn is purple and brown. I originally did try to incorporate brown into this color palette, but it just wasn't really working for me. So I decided to just lean into the purple and then use a couple of other colors that felt complementary for it. And in imawonder fashion, it ended up being very purple, pink, and blue, which is just the color palette that I always end up landing on. It seems to be a comfort zone of mine, even if I don't mean for it to happen. I genuinely tried to make brown happen for the color palette here, but it just wasn't working. And so the details here, I did them with the Faber-Castell Polychromos, so that's why they don't smudge. And the thing that I decided was just to paint over them for now, because painting around each jewel on this jacket would have just taken forever. So that's kind of when I decided, okay, I'm definitely going to have to introduce some acrylic wash, because that's an opaque medium that can go on top of the washes here of the jacket. And then for the little kind of corset underneath the jacket, I decided that my vision for it was that it was going to look like gold armor, essentially, because I felt like with Capricorn, I wanted to display that they are like very strong people. And so I didn't want to give her like full suit of armor necessarily, but I wanted to introduce little elements of it into the portrait. But before we get into more questions, I just want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is such a flexible platform. You can have a portfolio, you can have a shop, you can have your videos, whatever you like on there. And for me right now, what I really love is being able to have a secret Patreon shop where I can have all of the remaining extras of the prints and sticker rewards available for my patrons to shop if they missed out on a previous month. And if you are a creative, I highly recommend using Squarespace. You can use it for a multitude of different applications, and you literally don't need to know how to code at all. It's so intuitive to use. So if you're interested in launching your own website, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/imawonder for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So here I'm starting to introduce some colored pencils into the mix. I have been experimenting with the order of how I use my mediums, because typically when I was using color pencils with a paint medium, I would typically just use the paints or the gouache first and then use the color pencils on top, and then that's it. But lately I've been toying with the idea of using all the different mediums back and forth, which is quite the interesting process, because there are definitely cases where my brain is like, okay, I want to darken this area, but what medium should I use to darken it? Do I use watercolor? Do I use gouache? Do I use the color pencil? So that's been, I think, something that I really struggled with this illustration. Was I think I was giving myself maybe too many options, but I guess the way that I was approaching this was with the color pencils. It introduces a nice little bit of texture and grit, whereas acrylic gouache is super, super smooth. Sometimes, in my opinion, looks too smooth. So it's nice to have a little bit of both. And you can see here, I am now adding in some gouache. And this is where the gouache really comes in handy to really brighten some of these areas that I felt like kind of went a little bit too dark, which is something I obviously would not be able to achieve with watercolors and can only go so far with colored pencils. And the nice thing about using the paints on top of the colored pencils is it helps kind of melt everything together, but you can still see a little bit of that colored pencil grit. And I guess the kind of mode that I was going with this illustration was that I really wanted to make sure that I liked the face. So I spent a lot of time working on and rendering her face, especially in these early stages, because I feel like if the portrait does not have a face that I'm happy with, then the whole illustration is just ruined. So I really wanted to make sure that I gave myself some sense of confidence as I worked my way through this. And what helped was feeling like the face was looking decent. And another thing that happens with acrylic gouache illustrations is that because it's an opaque medium, I often lose the sketch as I progress through. So that's something that I really have been enjoying with the colored pencils, is being able to continue to reinforce the sketch throughout the process so that I don't lose the sketch entirely. I am personally a Libra, which notoriously is known for being very indecisive. So you can see here, I change up the color of the hair here underneath, which the reason why I ended up doing this, because in my brain, typically the part underneath the hair would be dark because it's in shadow. But then I realized that the jacket was also going to be quite dark, and they're very similar colors. They're both essentially like a purple pink mixture, and I didn't want the jacket and the hair to blend together. I wanted a little bit of sense of separation. So what I end up doing is making sure that the shoulder there is quite dark so that it set apart from the hair, and then that way you can see the difference between the two. And then with the under part of the hair, I keep the darkness closer to her face to get a sense of like contrast there, but then make it lighter as it comes into contact with the shoulder. And that is something that I'm really trying to pay more attention to when working on my illustrations now, is the values and how to make sure that all of the different elements of an illustration reads properly. Because with my preliminary sketches, the line art is always really heavy and really thick and messy. And so I end up visually relying on those to separate all the different items. But then when you get into the actual rendering of the illustration, my line art typically isn't quite as heavy and it's quite clean. And so what ends up happening is all of the different values end up being really similar. And so when you look at it from a distance, everything just sort of feels the same. And so value is really, really important in being able to have the illustration read like it being legible. And the beauty of being an artist is you are not tied down to the realism always. Like that's something that I think I need to continue to break away from, is the idea that things have to read quote unquote realistic. But I think now I'm at a place where I really need to put the legibility and just like the artistic choices in the forefront, as opposed to thinking, is this realistic? Would the lighting actually happen like this, etc.? Not that my work is ever super accurate to realism anyways, but just continuing to push the stylization to serve the illustration better. As for the actual character design and kind of choices that I made for this to be Capricorn, I wanted to make this Zodiac series a more kind of fantasy abstract kind of approach to it. Abstract in the sense that it's, you know, we don't have the Capricorn symbol or Capricorn text just like displayed in the forefront. I wanted it to read as Capricorn, but in more of its essence, and take elements of the sign, as opposed to it being like really aggressively zodiac looking, because this is something that I want to have everyone enjoy, not just because you're a Capricorn, since this is going to be for my patrons, and so everyone will receive the print and sticker. And I can understand that it seems kind of strange to have quote unquote merch of a sign that doesn't actually belong to you. And so with this Zodiac series, I'm just taking elements and using that as inspiration. So like I mentioned before, I chose the color purple as the main color focus for this piece because that is the color that's associated with Capricorn. I did a whole bunch of Zodiac kind of traits research a couple of years ago when I did a different Zodiac series. For those of you who've been following me for a little bit, it was Zodiac Warriors, where they were all like what you would expect. They were all warriors, kind of just inspired by the Zodiac astrology. And so I hung on to all this little research, and I've just been using that as the launching point. So unfortunately, I don't have any of the sources of where I got the information from. But the other thing that I wanted to note was the flower that's associated with Capricorn is pansies. And so that's why I ended up using pansies as the floral background choice. And then for all of these jewels, the reason why I chose to have this really bedazzled jacket, the tiara, the kind of gold corset kind of thing here, because to me, something that's often associated with Capricorn is being really hardworking and strong and being very goal oriented. I know another stereotype is being money oriented, but I didn't really want to lean into money necessarily. But I think that kind of leaning into this sort of sense of luxury was sort of more of the angle, like a sense of prestige as opposed to being like a money hungry person. Because, you know, someone who works really hard obviously should be able to enjoy their hard work. So that's kind of the viewpoint that I'm coming from with her being dripping in jewels. And when it came to the composition, the pose, the expression, to really illustrate the personality traits of a Capricorn, some of the things that I'd written down was conservative, good-mannered, and introverted. So I think that's why I decided to go with this pose where she's very poised and her hands are together, which to me reads a little bit more reserved. I think that helps sort of illustrate that the kind of introverted side, but I have her looking directly at the viewer to still give a sense of confidence and prestige, because just because someone is introverted and maybe more reserved doesn't necessarily mean that they're shy, right? I definitely think that with Capricorns, they are resourceful and wise, they're disciplined and goal-oriented. So to me, that still reads as confident. And with the clothing design, I really wanted to lean into my interest in fashion, but also obviously to keep in mind of the personality traits of the zodiac sign. And so Capricorns, they're very sensible. So that's why I went with the full jacket. And I really wanted all of these portraits still to feel interesting to me. So I felt like just the jacket wasn't enough. And so that's why I decided to go with that gold corset underneath, just to give it that extra oomph. And also the pendant, kind of the bolo tie, essentially, I chose, of course, a ram skull, because with the Capricorn, that is their symbol, is a ram. But I didn't want to include an actual ram. So knowing that I was including this gold corset, the jewels, I felt like having a bedazzled ram skull felt more subtle and fit the aesthetic better. Obviously, all zodiac signs are not going to be exact in terms of, if you are a Capricorn, maybe all of these traits don't necessarily resonate with you. That for me, with astrology, I take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes things line up, sometimes they don't. It's impossible to encapsulate all of Capricorns in X amount of traits. It's just for fun. So I hope that nobody takes any offense or, is disappointed if they don't feel like I'm representing their sign properly. This is why I wanted to keep the illustrations a little bit more abstract and not super on the nose, just so that it leaves a little bit more room for interpretation. But I just wanted to, talk about where I was coming from and the decisions I was making. And then for the background here, outside of the container, I decided to go with this kind of mountainous like sky, because with Capricorn, the element is earth that is associated with this sign. And so I thought that trying to include some of the element into the piece would also kind of just create an extra sense of fantasy and whimsy. And that's something that I really want to lean into. And so I think it'll be really fun to introduce water, fire, and air into the other illustrations for the corresponding signs. And kind of approaching the final kind of bits of the process of this illustration here, you can see I put in the black gouache in the background, which really transforms the piece, but also makes a lot of the elements feel washed out. So you can see that I did another pass on those peony flowers because I really wanted them to be pushed a little bit further back. I didn't want them to compete too much with the character, so I tried to make them a little bit darker. And now, of course, we are getting into the very satisfying line art here. Originally, I had thought I was going to try and do a lot of the line art with colored pencils, but because of the elements that are acrylic gouache, it's very difficult to get like a really dark line with colored pencils on top, just because it's so smooth at this point in the areas that have acrylic gouache. So it just made sense to go with acrylic gouache for the line art as well. Super smooth, really dark, and really makes the certain elements stand out. I really wanted, of course, the focus to be on her face. It's a very busy piece with a lot of details, so really made sure to put a lot of emphasis and care into her eyes, which, by the way, I gave her 2 different colored eyes, which is not something I do with characters very often, but I think is so cool. And the reason why I did that for this character is because one of the famous Capricorns is David Bowie. So that's where the inspiration come from. I had also experimented with different hairstyles for her as well, one of them being a little bit more of a kind of wolf cut inspired kind of vibe to also correspond with David Bowie. But in the end, just looking at the other kind of personality traits that I had listed about Capricorn, I felt like just like middle part straight long hair felt a little bit more reserved, sensible, just to go with the very prestigious look of this piece. And because it's got so many little elements throughout, it's very busy, I felt like keeping the hair a little bit more minimal would help the viewer just sort of be able to rest on something. But I also made her hair a little bit more windswept just to give it a little bit of movement and interest. And then again, to just really, really lean into that prestige, I decided to go with a little bit of a starburst around her, which I used the acrylic paint marker first just to map it out, and then some gold ink on top to give it that really satisfying, beautiful shine. But yeah, that pretty much concludes today's video. I hope that you enjoyed hearing my thoughts and seeing the process of this piece and are looking forward to the rest of the Zodiac series. I just posted this on Instagram and everyone's been so kind in the comments, which is actually making me feel a lot better because I was really starting to regret the choice to do this because I feel like there's so much pressure around doing Zodiac series type things, but I'm starting to feel a little better about it. And yeah, as I mentioned, this is going to be the Patreon print and sticker for the month of January. So if you are interested, you just join before January 31st to be able to receive her in the mail. And that is worldwide shipping included in the price. So I'll have the link in the description for that. And before I let you go, I just want to mention that the imawonder retreat to South Korea is officially available to book now. There is going to be 15 activities that's included in the package, which we will be going to check out lots of amazing architecture, markets, museums, and more. There will be a local guide with us the entire week, and it'll just be nonstop amazing fun. I have so much fun with you guys on the live stream, so imagine doing this in Korea. Early bird pricing is still available. You get $100 off, and once we have 10 confirmed bookings, we officially get to go. I really hope that it can happen. I can't wait to go to Korea with you. But yeah, that is officially everything from me. I hope that you have an amazing day or evening wherever you're at, and look forward to the rest of the Zodiac series throughout the year. And I will catch you in the next one. Bye.